Welcome to this month's Around the Table conversation. Each month, Zoweh's women's team, the Deepening Community, invites women everywhere to join us for a Zoom call. And in these calls, we talk about conversations of the heart. These are topics that matter deeply to us as women. Each month, we start the conversation with the team sharing their insights on a topic. And then the second half of the call, the women on the call have an opportunity to respond and connect with each other on the topic. This month, our guide team is sharing their experiences at our yearly women's encounter, the Deepening Weekend. Peek behind the scenes with us as we share how, despite pivot after pivot, how we stayed connected to the Lord and to each other in the middle of all that goes on and hosting one of these amazing events.
So welcome to the Deepening Communities Around the Table Zoom. And tonight we're sharing stories from the Deepening Weekend, which was just last month. Feels like yesterday, feels like a month and a half ago, feels like 3 years ago. It's crazy how time is just wonky that way.
Yeah. Maggie and I kind of got in an argument about it earlier this afternoon. It was just a couple weeks ago. No, it was a month ago. No, it was a couple weeks ago.
Breaking out the calendar. What's today?
I know.
It was just a moment ago.
Just a moment ago.
Yeah. So last month on Around the Table, we talked about soul rest and how we practice it and experience it in the day-to-day, as well as our hope to create that environment for women to experience at the Deepening Weekend, that they might experience the rest and refreshment and intimacy with God. And it feels a little different for the team, though, that whole rest and refreshment thing. I don't know that it was necessarily rest and refreshment. I feel like there was lots of intimacy with God, however, particularly with, just the way the weekend went. It was a weekend of feeling held and guided. And I felt really met in a lot of those places.
Yeah.
And I think too about how just the last couple of months, how we've had to pivot our dates for Around the Table, because we had some Thursdays that you couldn't do it, that I couldn't do it. So we've been shifting and pivoting and plot twists, and how they are such a part of life. And they were such a part of the Deepening Weekend too.
Yes.
Which was so interesting. And how we move through these changes with God matters. I mean, it makes the difference. I think about all the weeks of preparation and the opposition that we experienced, and how the power of that pause and taking a deep breath was something I was embracing on the regular. And then I think about how many women shared with us just how seamless it felt. Oh, it looked like everything went off without a hitch. And I'm like, yes, that's awesome.
So glad it seemed that way.
That's right. That's what we're hopeful for, is to strip away all the distractions. And I'm glad that they didn't experience that. So why don't we share some about what we experienced? Robin, you want to take a swing?
Sure.
All right.
Well, you mentioned pivoting, and and it was about 5 days before the Deepening Weekend, and I had to share with you, Sherry, about yet another pivot, and for us as a guide team heading into the weekend. And I remember your response, Sherry, and you said, pivot, take 37. And it did feel like it was the 37th time we had to take a breath and pivot and move in a different direction. And it was really, really challenging. And Dana's nodding. It was really, it was hard. It was hard for us.
Yeah.
But you really did move in a way that felt very kind and gave space for us to be able to take a breath and move differently. And that was significant for me, because you could have gotten really upset, and there's room for that. But and I would say, even as a team, I think about the conversation Dana and Sherry and I had. We even said, you know what, this is really hard. Let's bookmark this. We don't have the margin and the capacity right now to talk about it, but let's talk about it after, because it's important and it's significant. We need to be heard. We need to process how this is for us. And we did.
Yeah. That was actually, to me, it was beautiful the way that we were
Mm.
able to do that, the way that God allowed me to lay that aside until the end and to really be present for the mission that we were
In the thick of.
in the thick
Yeah.
of.
Yeah.
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 Mhm.
Yeah. And I love that you said it gave space,
Mm.
because I can see that now that I don't think I could see then. It gave us space to move into it differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It didn't feel binding. It felt like there
Mhm.
was space.
Yeah. Right. And when we talk about space, I think of the choice we get to pause.
Mhm.
And in one of your talks, Sherry, you said at the Deepening Weekend, Jesus invites us to pause, to choose, to move differently,
Mhm.
more in our true self.
Mhm.
And this can open a space to consider how to respond instead of reacting in learned false self ways.
Mhm.
And I wrote down in my journal, in my
Mhm.
deepening journal, right here,
That's
except
fun.
that's yours. But I was taking notes. And when you said that, I wrote Viktor Frankl in my notebook
Mhm.
because it reminded me so much of a quote that really means a lot to me that I really try to practice. And we're learning more about this idea of pausing
Mhm.
and being able to move differently. And his quote is, between stimulus and response, there is a space.
Mhm.
And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom.
Mm.
And for me personally, in that moment at the Deepening Weekend, as we were having to move and shift and pivot as a result of the changes, I was really aware of what it was like for me in the moment, more so how challenging those shifts and pivots and surprises can be, and how they can take me out, but that my response, I can choose my response.
Mhm.
And so here's an example. On Friday, we were having to, in the moment as a team,
Mhm.
shape what was coming that night. I believe it was for a panel that night. And you said to me, Robin, would you put together the framework for us as a team? And I instantly, in my gut, I just kind of braced and kind of froze and thought, putting together a framework is not in my wheelhouse. But I thought, I should do this. I should be able to do this. This isn't that hard. Robin, you should be able to do this. And Sherry's asking me to do this. And you've done all the framework, so much of the framework. I thought, I can do this one. And so against my better judgment, I said, sure. And then proceeded to, for the next hours, staring at a blank space, a blank page, because I could not do it. And it was in the moment. So it was all the more pressure that I felt, and therefore increasingly unable to put that together. And so I wished I had paused and just even said, can I have a minute to think about that? I need to push pause and think if can we talk about it or something? But I think it was more false self. I think it was more this learned way of, I need to be you to be okay with me and pleased with me. And I don't want to rock the boat too much. And so, but really what I was doing was not setting us up well. I wasn't being true. I wasn't being authentic, and it didn't help the mission at all. So yeah, that was something that I learned in the moment, or am learning. How important that pause is, and paying attention to my gut, the Spirit of God in me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think about it too, because it was the next morning at 6 a.m. when we had coffee. And I was like, how's it going? And you're like,
I got nothing.
You got nothing. And there was something in there that shifted for me, where it was like, I got this. I can do this. I got this. I've put something, you even said something that morning that made me realize I put something on you that was not yours to bear. And I was like, okay, I got this. I can do this.
And then when you said that, I remember I was like, I can share a story. I can share my part.
Mhm,
I can do
mhm,
that.
mhm.
But it's, identifying what I can and can't do,
Yeah.
and you identifying what you can
Yeah. Yeah.
do and are willing to do. And so, yeah, it's a learning.
Yeah. And it was, again, and it was God meeting, and it was God holding in the midst of all that, even in the midst of
Mhm,
what felt like a wild and crazy ride for some
mhm.
of it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And again, that shifted me into a different gear where I was like, okay, I got this. I can do this.
And when you shifted into that gear, everything else seemed like it clicked into place,
Mhm.
honestly. I
Mhm.
really,
Yeah.
looking back, I'd see that moment so clearly. You rising into, you stepping into
Mm-hmm.
what you're gifted in doing.
Well, and I want to add to that, what I saw in you when you did that was that you are a conductor of glory. And that
Mm.
you were in those panels were really like conducting, like it was a beautiful orchestra of like, I know your story. I want you to pull this, you drew it out of us.
Yeah.
And with the whole weekend, you were doing that. It was beautiful. Yeah.
Thanks. And I think that's the value of doing it with friends,
Mm.
right? Is we know
Because
each
we know
other's
each other.
stories.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we can press in during the messiness of things to say, okay, we'll deal with how we feel about it later. We're going to do the mission now, and then we'll circle back to the other stuff. And we trust each
Mhm.
other enough
Yes.
to do
Right.
that, to be able to hold that for now and come back to it later.
Mhm.
So that was really sweet.
Mhm.
Thanks for
Yeah.
sharing that.
Mhm.
Robin.
Mhm. Yeah. Dana, how about you?
Oh gosh. I just remember just all the things that were over the weeks and months before the deepening weekend that were happening. Losing the the head person that was heading up our intercessory prayer, and somebody ending up in the hospital who was on our intercessory prayer team.
Mhm.
A speaker losing someone, a dear friend, and she having to come late and she'd never been a part of the weekend. How is this all going to work? And oh my gosh, and then the last pivot at the last moment, I'm like, are we even supposed to be doing this? So, and then just getting there and being present and yeah, pausing a lot, um, laying things aside and just focus on God. What do you have? What's the role? How am I to step into this with my friends? And God, every step of the way, showed up for us. Is my internet stable and am I okay?
You're freezing a little bit,
I'm
but
sorry.
we
Am I
can
better?
still hear you.
Yeah,
Oh,
you're good
good.
now.
Mhm.
Yeah, he just came through. I watched him come through for all of us. I watched him speak. This is what you're to do in this session. This is how this is going to go. And I loved interacting with the women that I got to talk to, and how God met so many of me, first of all, and so many of the women that I was able to talk to. And so thank you, Jesus, for coming through. And I think, well, he knew ahead of time how this weekend was going to go. And it was a rescue for us as much as it was a rescue for every woman that was there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned the prayers and how that team took some hits.
oh yeah.
Because I remember some of those prayer calls leading up, because we get on a call once a week to pray about all the things that are happening. And as we're watching this team be battered in the midst of the opposition that was coming against, the prayers began to include that, God, may you take every single one of these pivots, everything that the enemy is trying to use against us, is trying to take this out. And may you do two things with it. May you put it back on the enemy, just stab him with it. And two, may it make the weekend all the better.
Yes.
That everything he tries to do to take us out will just make it more and more significant, more and more real, more and more authentic for the women. And I think
I remember the first afternoon up there, I was sitting outside and it was really breezy that day, and just on my knees on the inside and tearful, and Jesus come, Jesus come. And this wind blew through the trees, and I just felt like there were angels in the wind. It felt like he was coming. every breath we took, every prayer we uttered. And that was such beautiful reassurance.
Mhm. Yeah, and it felt like this was a weekend where tears were really present. And I know it was so noticeable and so palpable. The tears were so right there for you, Dana. And because of some of the schedule, the women spent more time in their tears and in their grief. And so would you share a little bit about your journey of tears?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This honestly, this past fall, I would say was a huge invitation from God. I asked a question on a retreat that I was on, a different retreat. Well, we were supposed to ask, what is it that you hide from yourself and from God? And God spoke to me right away that I hide my tears from myself and from Him. And I do that by numbing and stuffing, and that's just what I've done all my whole life. And so I've just been invited to allow my tears, to give myself time for my tears instead of I don't have time for this. And they are a little bit more of a regular presence in my life, and I'm so thankful. And my tears, our tears, are precious to Him. He stores them in a bottle, it says in the Psalms. And um, I just encourage all of us to invite our tears, our grieving tears, our joyful tears. They are cleansing, they are holy. Melissa and Michelle are smiling and laughing there for some reason.
Because Michelle came in hot.
But yeah.
But it was a sweet invitation that you made through the weekend.
It
to
is, yeah.
women.
And even some of the things that we were invited to share at the parenting panel, I was walking and am walking through some hard things with my adult kids. And I'm like, the morning of the panel, I was up crying. Well, 2 mornings in a row, Lord, I don't even know if I want to do this. I don't know if I have something to say, but I don't even know if I want to. What do you want, Jesus? Do you want me to? And you ladies giving me the freedom, Dana, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. And just wrestling and finally feeling permission and invitation to vulnerably be there with y'all. Yeah. We have a wonderful team.
Yes, we do. And I remember it was really, really noticeably significant what you shared. And you didn't have to. And if you hadn't, it would have been okay. But what you shared was so authentic. And I think it was so, you were very present to your tears, your heart, and to Jesus. You just were really sharing from a very vulnerable place. And it was really beautiful and very inviting. And I don't know of a woman who couldn't on some level resonate with what you shared. So thank you for being willing to do that.
You're welcome.
How about you, Maggie? Would you experience that weekend? Your first weekend as part of the Deepening Weekend team.
Yeah, it was busy for me. The two words that kind of come to mind for the weekend were exploration and sisterhood. And exploration was just the sense of, I don't know how it's going to go logistically. I'd been to a Deepening Weekend before, but just the idea of being on the team and running the outpost and emceeing and running back and forth all over the place in the dining hall. And then still wanting to steal away the time alones with God and be there and be present for my heart and what the Lord would bring in that, because the first weekend for me was so significant that I had gone to. So that's kind of exploration and just kind of seeing how it all played out, like not really having a huge expectation and then, just rolling with it as I went. And then sisterhood, for me, it was so special to get to put faces to names. And to hear people's stories and to connect with the women in the outpost that I worked with, and how just even that team, and then our group up at the lead team, just those groups in particular, but then also just the feeling of everyone, of just a sweet sisterhood and authentic and able to connect and support each other. Couple stories that just pop into my mind from the outpost. There were multiple times when we would come to lunch, and we had to open the outpost right as lunch was starting, and we came straight off of time alone with God. And very significant time alone with God for a few of us, and still, literally still teary and coming and being like, I don't know if I can really show up right now. But it was a sweet time where we just kind of held each other and held space. And eventually we got, you go fold clothes right now. Don't worry about like doing cashier. But it was such a sweet place of just being with each other and being that safe space to, like, tears were welcome, and just holding each other and listening. And when it was slower in the shop, just really taking time to listen to each other's stories. It was precious. And for me, at my first Deepening Weekend, it was really significant. That felt like the Lord said to me, these are your people. And I had literally just met them. So it felt like this super odd, like freshman girl in college walking up to some strange man and saying, I think God just told me we're going to get married. So I didn't lead with that. I didn't go up to them and say, we're going to be best friends. But in the back of my head, there was the Lord just saying, these are your people. And we lived in Seattle at the time. And I remember thinking, God, either there's a lot of plane trips in my future, or we're moving, or I don't know what, but okay, I'll take it. I love them. They're great. And then I think it was the first time alone with God, the Lord just impressed that on me again at this weekend, and was like, these are your people. Mm-hmm. And this place is important to you. And it was just a gush and just a feeling of like, look what he's done in those 2 years. And he's moved my family across, and he's knit me into this team in such a beautiful way that's been so good for my heart, and it's drawn my true self out. So just the sisterhood of that, and that's what the Lord just, like, I have a sisterhood, and I didn't before. So that's just so precious to me.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. And we saw you offer that, and we saw your effect, the effect of your life, the effect of that, what God told you on the outpost, on every conversation that you had with women. I was struck by every time I looked over to the outpost or I took a walk over there were women praying together, they were crying together, they were laughing together. I mean, there was the gamut of everything going on of life.
Yeah, it was beautiful. It was fun to see how, and that was, I mean, we wanted it to be a safe place for people, but it was better than I could have imagined.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, well done. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
We love being your people.
Yeah.
We're glad you're our people too.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching this month's Around the Table conversation. Next up, we have an extra bonus episode for you. 6 women are sharing their stories from the Deepening Weekend and how the Lord came for their hearts in very beautiful and unique ways. You will not want to miss this. If you enjoyed this video, would you take a moment to like it, share it, and subscribe to Zoweh's YouTube channel? See you next time.